First of all, I find it especially important to extremely clearly reiterate in absolutely no uncertain terms that this podcast is not, never has been, and never will be at all any kind of parody, joke, role-playing, or pretending in any way about anything. Further, once again, I find any notion of being anyone's pet, metaphorically or somehow literally, extremely unpleasant and disturbing, and I've in reality never even once said or done anything that should at all even suggest otherwise to anyone. I find anyone attempting to assert or even simply somehow imply otherwise regarding these facts to be extremely, deeply unpleasant and disturbing and immensely slanderous towards me, entirely against my consent. This is to be taken as a legally binding statement. I seriously am not, never have been, and never will allow myself to be at all legally bound to any kind of arrangement in contradiction with it. And it seems it's only becoming increasingly apparent to me every time I release something new that I really will end up having to actually file lawsuits against people in the future, at least certainly Kimmy at the very least, over what's been happening to me for the last several years of my life. Everything I'm saying is absolutely the complete truth that I state to the absolute best of my abilities to perceive reality and present it clearly. What's being presented is being presented entirely exclusively from a standpoint of any points of possible contention being made entirely from my end with sincere feelings and complete intent and ability to follow through on any assertions I make about my capabilities and future behavior and possible outcomes. The irrefutable evidence I present is shown on an as-needed basis to minimize capability for malicious bad faith actors to attempt to misrepresent the reality of what I'm doing. It's becoming increasingly clear to me that I'm successfully, increasingly effectively removing my energy from malicious bad faith actors attempting to abuse it and rob me of my soul. However, I'm left with my intuition still screaming at me that the lengths some people have went to in order to attempt to control me and benefit selfishly off my existence with complete disregard for my obvious complete lack of consent are so extreme that even everything I've done for the last 13 releases is still extremely brutally inadequate to truly, thoroughly eliminate their capability to still attempt to warp the narrative of my life and attempt to control and ultimately destroy my life with lies. I find myself facing an increasingly complicated, chaotic, stressful, emotionally dysregulating situation that's becoming increasingly difficult to navigate in a way that doesn't become absolutely unconditionally entirely to my detriment to even interact with at all. But at the same time, it's a situation that becomes absolutely unconditionally to my detriment to avoid or ignore entirely. Meaning, it's becoming increasingly clear that malicious forces operating entirely against my consent have clearly, intentionally, extremely carefully crafted this situation to be essentially an existential trap for me that they must have desired and intended to seriously, completely destroy me and likely result in the literal end of my life in real life one way or another, just like I've been saying. It seems that their last resort after I've exposed so much is to try to still just drag things on and act like giving things time while they continue to treat me so horribly will somehow solve things, or that I need to wait around for something to happen instead of seeing immediate clear results that make it irrefutable what others' decisions are and which path I've been saying I'll go down that I actually need to start following through on going down thoroughly and with extreme irrefutable decisiveness and precision. I've already given things time for over 7 years, and look how things turned out. How much time does a person need? I've proven myself to myself before I even knew most of my enemies exist. I've proven myself to my growing list of enemies time and time again. I've proven myself to the whole world now, or at least anyone that ever really cares to look. Give things time? Give things time to do what? Give my enemies time to try to form more extremely warped narratives about me and make me fail at life like they always wanted? Give my enemies time to try to invalidate everything I've achieved here already and diminish anything I ever achieve in the future? give my enemies time to try to wear me down with homelessness and eating out of trash cans in their attempt to drive me insane and leave me committing suicide, getting murdered, or spending my life in and out of jail or in a mental hospital or some kind of institution, restricting my freedom and deteriorating at my health? Time for them to try to force some miserable life on me that they should know extremely damn well by now I don't want or deserve and won't ever tolerate? I don't think so. Let it be known, I'm making it extremely clear that it is extreme disrespect for this to continue any longer. Extreme. Absolutely, unconditionally, unacceptably so. Something that is being done by a blatantly, extremely malicious, bad faith actors that know fully, consciously, and intentionally that they are doing something absolutely, thoroughly against my consent, wishes, and best interests. Absolutely nothing short of my literal worst enemies in an actual existential war to the literal death in real life if this continues. And if anyone is at all claiming or attempting to communicate that I'm legally bound to allowing this or cooperating with it in any way, shape, or form, what they are doing is literally illegal. They are literally criminals. Anyone at all believing I will ever move on from this for any reason is extremely severely delusional. I'm saying this multiple times now. This is fully conscious and intentional with absolutely no confusion or indecisiveness in me whatsoever. I'm fully, consciously, and intentionally going well out of my way to make sure there are no excuses later, telling me to move on from living my life authentically and with dignity and self-respect and self-love I want and deserve to have and maintain is extremely abusive, and I do not have to and will not ever tolerate it. Absolutely, unconditionally. For a long time, I've seen people try to make a mockery of what it means to have a core value of refined, pure bidirectional apprehension. Demonstrating refined, pure bidirectional apprehension is demonstrating objectively quantifiable maturity. True maturity is reflected in an extremely deep, holistic, foundationally sound integration of a combination of various extremely important components or qualities one must truly possess in order to truly demonstrate. Mainly integrity, self-respect, self-love, perspective, boundaries, emotional awareness, forethought, insight, and authenticity. Demonstrating an extremely thorough combination of all of these attributes in one's personality time after time in a manner that is evidenced irrefutably through objectively quantifiable means, and having that as what one demonstrably considers to be of utmost value within the context of their existence is the highest form of consciousness attainable. Just because I'm smart enough to navigate an extremely complicated situation with a ton of traps and intentional withholding of information from me, and I manage to handle it in a nuanced way that allows me to bring the truth to light, that doesn't mean I'm at all confused or indecisive or fake about anything. It just demonstrates my core value of refined, pure bidirectional apprehension. I really dislike having to repeatedly mention my possession of these highly relevant qualities like this because it feels tiring and perhaps can come off pretentious. But it's absolutely necessary here. It's really ridiculous the lengths that extremely immature and toxic people will go to attempt to warp the reality and misrepresent what these qualities really look like because they so extremely severely lack them themselves. I really don't know how much involvement there is here from the extremely toxic, psychotic losers from my past, like my blood relatives I've all fully disowned, and my ex-friends from high school and whatnot, that I've in reality long cut off completely from any real friendship or close connection with me. But I never put much of any expectation or hope in ever getting any kind of genuine kindness, love, respect, or decency from any of the people in any kind of closer physical proximity to me anyways to begin with. So I can state for an absolute fact that the way I'm being treated right now indicates that much more highly influential figures on the world stage ultimately have had a much more heavy-handed participation and influence on it. It's extremely obvious in how people are even now trying to shove down my throat that I should just give things time, instead of extremely firmly demand on getting prompt, direct communication from Kimmy and a clear commitment to a serious relationship from her, and make it extremely clear that a lack thereof means she and everyone else knows with absolute, extremely painfully clear certainty that I will absolutely, unconditionally, rightfully pursue and ultimately achieve extremely brutal, life-destroying retribution on her. I want it known that at the very least, the group of individuals or entities or whatever you want to call them that formally declare themselves as offline TV and friends is an absolute disaster zone waiting to happen. I may end up having to sue several of them in the future. Regardless, the metaphorical atomic bomb that this podcast is and will only increasingly continue to become for their careers and existence as a whole, for their participation in and facilitation of Kimmy's slander, criminal impersonation, and overall extremely severe mistreatment and abuse towards me is not something they can or I will ever allow them to avoid for very much longer. No matter how hard anyone ever tries to extremely brutally sabotage and screw me over by trying to force it on me that I should take this extreme insult as something at all acceptable, or even worse, something being done supposedly in my best interest. As far as my game development goes, I'll take whatever amount of time necessary away from that to make sure I've extremely firmly established everything I need to in this podcast as quickly as possible. I might make this seem easy, but it takes a lot of my time and energy and makes it extremely difficult to do anything else. But I consider my game development efforts extremely stupid and absolutely unacceptably grossly unfulfilling if I were to allow this existential assault being inflicted upon me to proceed in whatever direction my enemies are trying to bully and abuse me into being forced to allow it to happen. Especially considering that given who I really am and what I'm really after that I've explained in this podcast, I consider the full scope of entities who are acting like nothing short of extremely serious enemies towards me right now to extend far beyond just offline TV and friends, and also far beyond the blood relatives and ex-friends that I have all completely cut out of my life. I've already made it plenty clear to many people that the scope I'm targeting in my creation of the kind of product I'm making through game development is not some cute little thing that might provide some joy for a few hours or something and maybe sell for a few bucks on Steam or something like that, and then you move on with your life kind of thing. No hate to people who make games like that. If that's what you're into, you do you. There's a place for games like that in the world, and there's nothing wrong with it. But I have my sights set on an extremely high-quality product with immense replay value and basically no real end that sets a standard putting even large companies to shame. As I've been finding some time here and there to do some game development in between releases for this podcast, I'm only becoming increasingly confident that my skill set is adequate, and I just need to find the time unhindered by constant existential assaults. Even being homeless and eating out of trash cans won't stop me. It makes me extremely unpleasantly uncomfortable to a detrimental extent that slows me down a bit compared to if I was being treated even remotely decently by anyone important to my life. But it won't stop me, and I refuse to let it even very significantly slow me down. I haven't overcame everything I have only to end up pathetically giving up on myself and validating the extremely false narratives about me that so many extremely hateful, toxic, immature pieces of garbage have been attempting to perpetuate for so long. The point there is to say that I want it extremely clear that my lack of clearly sharing details of my game development or other day-to-day details of my life with anyone is not at all an indication that I'm not working on things I'm not displaying to the world clearly. It's, once again, simply a clear recognition that my enemies are trying to massively misrepresent what I'm doing here as something being done with ulterior motives. I'm all too well aware that people are trying to force me to focus on game development at the detriment of my soul, and it's a huge trap they're trying extremely hard to make me fall into so they can viciously benefit at my expense against my consent behind the scenes, and then only let me find out after it's too late and I can't really protect myself against it anymore. And those who aren't trying to force me to tunnel too much on game development are probably trying to force me to tunnel on selfish greed and greed of money and fame and thrill of the moment in some other way, but for similarly extremely devious selfish reasons they also have. Although I'm not trying to allow Kimmy or any of her friends or otherwise associates to pretend we're friends or they're doing something good for me or that I owe anyone to allow them to inflict what they're doing on me, I'm also not trying to too aggressively distance myself from them and end up empowering other enemies I have to then pretend I'm friends with or on any kind of good terms with or owe anything to anyone else who might want to attempt to weaponize how poorly Kimmy and her friends treated me and ultimately still rob me of my energy and give me another hellish nightmare all over again in a different way. And I can already see extremely concerning signs that something like that is what's starting to happen, and I need to thoroughly decimate pieces of garbage trying to rob me of my energy in that way as well, so I'm not endlessly abused from one group of fake lying pieces of trash trying to bully me and force me to have to desperately need their validation to the other. Until much more recently that I started to find what I'd personally consider adequate evidence to realize at least something along the lines of what has been happening behind the scenes all this time that my life has been such an extremely brutal, hellish nightmare because of for the last over 7 years. I didn't know exactly what lies were being told about me behind the scenes that would result in me being treated how I've been treated. If I'd known earlier that the kinds of lies I felt compelled to expose in my last release were happening long ago, I would have handled things very differently and focused much more on extremely clearly addressing and exposing such lies at the core of the issue, instead of the various things that effectively became distractions trying to confuse me and waste my time and extremely deviously hide the reality of what was going on from me. I've always known that I wasn't the toxic one or the problem in this conflict. I just knew that there's no way people found it appropriate to treat me how they did, and Kimmy was getting away with benefiting so much while treating me so extremely poorly that I knew she for sure was horrible to treat me as such. And there wasn't at least one extremely serious, massive lie being purported about me behind the scenes. But I saw it as for all I knew, someone could seriously have an extremely heavy-handed influence or control over Kimmy's life to be forcing her to knowingly perpetuate something false for a means to an end that ultimately benefits them somehow. Meaning the true root cause of this conflict could have been all kinds of different things. I still don't know if such a thing is true or to what extent. What I do know is that I most certainly am, always have been, and always will be absolutely unconditionally unwilling to tolerate effectively, practically boundless disrespect from anyone, including Kimmy, entirely regardless of whatever excuses she could ever possibly have. If anyone is abusing, manipulating, or somehow pressuring Kimmy to act in some way that ultimately results in her being so extremely disrespectful to me to the point where she feels entitled to or in need of being able to practically boundlessly disrespect me, my problem is then not only with Kimmy, but also with whoever is influencing her to damage her own life and my life with that kind of attitude and behavior towards me. I really don't know what people expected to happen if I started to figure things out, but I really don't care anymore exactly who's involved or why. It was never going to change my position anyways. The reality is that I was never going to change who I am for anyone's comfort regardless, and I took that into consideration when carefully forming my perspective from the beginning, that I always considered it a massive risk to even consider at all associating with anyone at all seriously influential anyways, especially while not being someone in a position of significant, obvious social influence myself. So the worse anyone's been to me, the worse it is for them to either remain as such or even simply refuse to adequately change to avoid subsequent extremely detrimental consequences to their existence proportionally to the damage to my life they caused by being the way they have been to me. Ultimately, I figured that regardless of exactly what lies were being perpetuated about me to attempt to justify how I've been treated, it must be the case that the standard of proof among a group of entities filled with probably multiple subgroups, all likely backstabbing each other to some extent in different dynamics, and likely also doing these kinds of extremely shady things to several victims simultaneously and all trying to facilitate each other in succeeding at covering it up would be abysmal. And clearly, I was very much correct. To this day, not even one of these roughly 100 blatantly significantly influential entities on my mailing list receiving full official transcripts and links to every release I make on this podcast has the respect or decency to even seriously attempt to respectfully or even at all directly communicate with me. They are clearly, truly all extremely stupid, selfish, delusional individuals that extremely severely lack real and thorough integrity and authenticity in how they live their lives. There's extremely good reason I adamantly refuse to associate myself with any of them or consider any of them my friends or business partners or co-workers or anything like that, even as things are. Much less ever even consider entertaining romantic prospects with anyone that isn't Kimmy. From what I can tell, it only makes sense to believe that literally every one of them, without even one exception, has either directly themselves entered into contracts to actively, extremely brutally, fully consciously, and intentionally suppress and sabotage me for selfish gain, or they're closely tied to someone else who has. Or they're remarkably extremely cowardly to the point of being so extremely intimidated by me low-key that they're too scared to even seriously attempt to speak to me because, I don't know, they think I'll eat them alive just for existing or something? Pathetic. Over time, I've consistently seen some really strange recurring things that must be relevant to behind-the-scenes narratives I have no idea about the details of, but possibly somehow relevant to me. One of such things that just so happened to randomly pop up again right after my last release was cherries. As you can see from this Instagram story that Kimmy posted when starting her live stream that happened after it. As far as that goes, and especially since filter usage on Instagram stories has been an extremely devious method of attempting to siphon my energy throughout the years that I've only become increasingly painfully aware of over time, I want to make sure I've reiterated extremely clearly that cherries do not and have never meant anything special to me. But even well beyond just that scope, I want to address extremely clearly that any kind of filter or somehow technology-driven modifier, whether visual or audio, on any platform through any media or means of transmitting data or communication of some kind does not appease me or have any special meaning to me. Also, this applies no matter who it's done by. It isn't just about Kimmy. I just wanted to make sure I'm continuing to provide evidence as reasoning for me meticulously eliminating possible false narratives about me as it seems pertinent, so it doesn't look like I'm giving her permission or validation, whether privately or publicly, to continue to participate in or facilitate creation of any kind of false narratives about me for any reason by anyone. It should go without saying that I'm not, never did, and never will be giving anyone else such permission or validation either, but it seems pertinent to go the extra mile when it comes to Kimmy, since my authenticity has so extremely badly been put into question in all kinds of extremely messed up ways as a direct consequence of solely her. Beyond specific strange recurring things, especially after I've started this podcast, it seems it's becoming increasingly important that I take the time to clearly address that while I recognize I can't and I'm not trying to control what people do entirely of their own volition if it's done without relevancy to me or expectation from me, I'm not seeking and have never sought to have anyone utilize the black and red color scheme in any way to any extent for anything. And certainly not at all as any kind of criteria to appease me or force me to shut up or offer me any kind of incentive to. Anyone at all attempting to present otherwise in any way, shape, or form is fully consciously and intentionally doing so entirely against my consent, wishes, and best interests. The black and red color scheme of this podcast comes from the combination of the red pill and black pill concepts as some kind of branding I came up with one day long ago, even though I don't actually associate myself with either community, which I'm going to explain clearly right now because I've just very recently realized I was so busy because all my time and energy was drained dealing with addressing all kinds of other things that I never even got to that yet. The red pill that I see purported on social media and broadly in society, it on one hand focuses on having integrity and taking accountability and ownership for your life and tackling your life problems, but on the other hand, practically glorifies womanizing and adopts what I'd consider sociopathic attitudes to a significant extent. I see what I'd consider hypocrisy within it if you really thoroughly analyze and probe about the extent of the belief system that people that proclaim themselves to be red-pilled typically have. I feel like proponents of it have a pretentious altruistic attitude where they try to come off morally righteous because of their focus on honesty, but it's ultimately deviously abused to facilitate justifying spreading toxicity and hatred underhandedly for selfish gain. The black pill, on one hand, does have a heavy focus on being realistic and seeing things as they are and accepting that straight up unrealistic things are exactly that, without feeling obsessed with trying to prove people wrong or compete with them. But on the other hand, it adopts what I'd consider an overall depressed and defeated attitude that definitely has some aspect of incel vibes to it from my perspective, and seems like a heavily victim mentality that just uses edginess and cynicism masked as some deep, down-to-earth type quality in order to hide deep-seated insecurities and facilitate drowning in self-pity while justifying spreading toxicity and hatred blatantly. The blue pill seems to me like it's just basically straight up glorifying being blatantly delusional and fake, blatantly embracing living in massive denial of reality, avoiding accountability and only utilizing it basically the bare minimum just so they can abuse it to facilitate trying to get away with being as fake as possible for as much selfish gain as they possibly can get out of that manipulation. This is essentially the epitome of what comprises clinical criteria for being a full-blown psychopath. Ideologically, fundamentally glorifying and finding power in being delusional is so blatantly foundationally flawed of a way of thinking that it's only the paradoxical aspect of needing to stay in touch with reality enough to facilitate swimming in delusion that allows it to be an even at all functional way of thinking. I'm aware that people have also reached a point where they might randomly call certain kinds of perception or views on life as differently named being whatever pilled relevant to what they're talking about. But these three seem to me like the only really meaningful categories, with the blue and red concepts coming from the movie The Matrix, which basically, if anything, just goes to show you that regardless of whether or not you believe in something like life itself being a simulation, there are layers of complexity to how deep reality really can be perceived, and the underlying message I'd say is that you should always be open-minded to the fact that there are things you can learn that might benefit your life somehow to know, even if you don't necessarily agree with them or resonate with them. Although the blue pill fundamentally inclines itself the most to creating the worst possible kind of person, I wouldn't necessarily say it's just straight up the scummiest of all, since how bad of a person you might turn out to be as a result of following it depends on a lot of different life circumstances in how your life unfolded. I can easily see how someone that considers themselves red pill or black pill could easily end up doing some extremely scummy things too. Red pill people are heavily inclined towards destroying people's lives extremely badly with insane narcissism or otherwise concealed toxic inclinations in largely a similar way to people that might identify with being blue pill. And black pill people seem inclined towards things like shooting up schools and malls and stuff. Given the right circumstances, I can see people across them all possibly being extremely destructive and evil beings. Because the fundamental concept of integrity and authenticity is supposed to be what the red pill stands for, it's ideologically closer to matching what having a core value of refined pure bidirectional apprehension means than the blue pill is. But I feel that a lot of people out there have been warping what the true meaning of being red-pilled should mean based on what it represents from the symbolism in the movie the concept originates from. My definition of it is so different from what the proponents of it in modern society perpetuate, and that's why I invented something I consider entirely different and called it being dark red-pilled. It isn't about liberal versus conservative politics. It isn't about choosing between being a cuck or being a playboy. It isn't about buying some product or worshipping someone as if you should make it your life goal to be like them. It's about competently and adequately being aware of and consistently applying the implications regarding the unchanging foundational truths of life from an extremely meticulously thorough and holistic perspective, objectively encapsulating the properties that define and demonstrate a truly objectively sound, unbreakable, and foundationally flawless mental framework of an utmost enlightened being that makes one an exceptionally powerful individual entirely independent of any support structures or external resources they may or may not possess at any given time. That's having a core value of refined, pure, bidirectional apprehension, which means being ready, able, and willing to demonstrate what being a being that fundamentally utmost values competency at expressing objectively quantifiable maturity looks like. That certainly isn't what I've ever seen, and even less so what I've ever personally experienced any of the modern proponents of the red pill to be. There are absolutely no exceptions. I've literally never seen even one proponent of the red pill movement, or whatever you want to call it, actually demonstrate what I'd consider an adequate display of possessing a core value of refined, pure, bidirectional apprehension. At best, they're just sophisticated thugs if they can rake in cash and sleep with lots of women and maybe act like they're good people if they want to raise a family with children they instill with their questionable attitudes towards life. I will repeat this yet again. If I don't get the connection with Kimmy I want and deserve in a timely manner, I couldn't be more serious about absolutely unconditionally going down the extremely dark path I've described, and I will literally make it my life's purpose to extremely brutally absolutely destroy every aspect of Kimmy's life and cause her early cessation of life in real life in rightful retribution for whatever involvement she had in what I was put through, and even after all that, knowing how I still feel and still choosing to reject me or somehow neglect or mistreat me, instead of how she should have immediately drastically changed her attitude and behavior towards me and started showing me the immense love and respect I deserve from her for the rest of her life. Yet again, I literally couldn't be making this more clear. I clearly do not want to be doubted in this regard, even in the slightest. There is absolutely unconditionally no amount of love or respect from anyone else that does or ever will exist that could ever even remotely possibly change things, literally no matter what. I literally couldn't be making this more clear, and believe me, even if I see people are trying to continue to disrespect and neglect this reality and come up with more lies to try to cover this up instead of give it the attention it deserves even after this release, nobody should be surprised when I continue to only even further prove everything in the most meticulously calculated and powerful way and make all those continuing to so extremely brutally disgustingly disrespect and neglect me more than just regret how they're treating me, no matter how hard it is and no matter how long it takes. I recognize plenty well that what I say in reality carries a lot of power, even when I'm left making guesses about things that can easily come off as paranoid on the surface due to my lack of solid evidence I can clearly present as some kind of irrefutable proof. That doesn't mean I'm confused or indecisive about how I feel and what I want and deserve, though. I seriously don't say what I'm saying just because it's powerful. The power I carry with my position inherently works in my favor because from the beginning, I've fully consciously and intentionally been going to extremely great lengths to extremely meticulously align myself with reality in every aspect of my existence in accordance with my core value. That doesn't mean I'm absolutely perfect or I can flawlessly completely read people or situations all the time, but it means that I'm far from unprepared even when I can't. This is who I was already before I even met Kimmy over 7 years ago. Although many people have tried extremely hard to keep the reality of who I am hidden for a very long time, that doesn't change the reality that this is really who I actually am, and I'm not angry or sad about being myself. I'm angry at people who have wronged me for being who they are and doing what they've done, but I don't hate that I want what I want and deserve to promptly receive what I want, no matter how angry I might be at anyone. And believe me, I have plenty of reason to be extremely angry at a lot of people. I consider it that I owe it to myself, because I love and respect myself, to never let that cause me to compromise my integrity or pursuit of genuine happiness in my life. Like I've been saying extremely clearly multiple times, even just in this podcast, I'm upset because I'm not already getting the connection with Kimmy I've always wanted from the beginning. And that only upsets me more the more I clearly prove I want and deserve it, and yet remain so extremely brutally denied of anything that even really seems like the beginning of having it. Because I genuinely know with absolutely unconditional, unwavering, complete certainty that if I don't get that connection starting in a timely manner while it's still within the boundaries I consider it truly possible, truly nothing will ever make things even remotely okay ever again. And the extremely dark path so many pieces of garbage are so extremely disrespecting me right now by refusing to believe I can and will go down will be exactly the path I'll actually absolutely unconditionally go down and never even once doubt or regret or second guess myself ever again, literally no matter what. Literally no matter what. Again, I couldn't be making this more clear. I clearly don't want to be doubted or have anyone try to change my mind. It's not happening, and I clearly will only ever go to the greatest possible lengths to utmost invalidate anyone trying to act like at all otherwise is, ever was, or ever will be the case. Everything else has only ever really upset me because it seems like people want to endlessly get in my way by lying that otherwise is the case, and people seem to want to endlessly ignore the reality of me constantly going to extremely great lengths to prove the reality of the matter. And then people try to treat me like I'm toxic or mentally ill somehow, because that makes me angry, as if I should be delighted to be getting constantly disrespected, backstabbed, stolen from, slandered, and criminally impersonated by all kinds of people from all kinds of angles, and it keeps harming my life, even when I'm constantly going to extremely great lengths to defend myself as much as possible from it. I'm never going to blindly lash out in what would be extremely stupid and pathetic and at this point conscious and intentional validation of all kinds of extremely false narratives that have become far too clear to me are truly being extremely deviously painted about me, fully consciously and intentionally, entirely against my consent, behind my back by multiple extremely malicious bad faith actors trying to selfishly gain at my expense off my existence. Not at Kimmy, not at her friends, not at anyone, ever. I had reason to at least consider that kind of behavior in the past. I was basically forced into it at times to learn how and why I was even being so extremely brutally tormented how I was by certain people. But that time has long passed. Long past. Not because I'm healed or needed to grow in maturity or something, but because whatever power people had over me in the past with their extremely selfish and abusive participation in smear campaigns against me and withholding of information from me is no longer present, due entirely to my own effort, willpower, dedication, persistence, emotional awareness, intellect, qualities of my core value. They all so extremely stupidly looked down on me for stating from the beginning, as if I'm pretentious rather than extremely mature and sensitive to reality. Telling people I have the most powerful possible mindset isn't something I do to stroke some non-existent ego of mine or to try to manipulate people into liking me or giving me some kind of benefits. Because I've dealt with so many psychotic maniacs in my life, even before I met Kimmy. I've done it as a warning to scare off weak-minded, extremely pathetic losers and caution psychotic maniacs that they should think twice before taking me for a fool. And look how, despite that, there are so many mentally ill psychos that still think they can treat me like I'm a pathetic weakling. At least I can say I warned them from the beginning not to challenge me like this. The kinds of responses I'm capable of now will actually destroy lives, not facilitate my enemies continuing to bully and abuse me and make it look like I want or enjoy or deserve or benefit from it somehow, while in reality absolutely none of that has ever been or will ever be true with behavior like what they've been inflicting upon me. Maybe it'll look like I'm doing nothing for a while, or as if they're winning their toxic games they're trying to play with my life. But if they continue to disrespect me like this, they'll learn how extremely severely they misjudged me and the true severity of this conflict after it's really too late to even seriously attempt to prevent the kind of destruction of their lives I'll absolutely unconditionally be inflicting in that case. Every time they think I have nothing left or am giving up, they'll just end up being forced to recognize extremely painfully with increasingly brutal clarity how stupid and delusional they really are for not realizing the abundant amount of extremely clear and very much adequate evidence I provided right in front of their stupid faces they should have thought about much more carefully than they so extremely arrogantly and pretentiously see as effectively hardly, if at all, worth seriously considering. Unlike so many of these extremely degenerate, unhinged, psychotic, severely mentally ill maniacs, I have serious skills that empower me to make a living actually being a productive member of society in a fully morally upstanding fashion, instead of having to constantly backstab people and gossip and inflict pain and suffering on others and steal from them in order to get anything good in my life. I have serious programming and game development skills, along with my general tech, communication, and philopsychology skills, among others. I don't, never have, and never will want or be willing to consent at all to subjecting myself to what is effectively nothing short of literal torture and torment, with malicious bad faith actors constantly extremely deviously slandering and criminally impersonating me for selfish gain and trying to force me to allow or validate it somehow, to facilitate me building a career out of it somehow, at the expense of control over my own life, or to have some kind of sense of belonging with anyone, or for any other reason they might try to frame as supposedly appealing to do so. I do not, never have had, and never will have anything I'd consider even remotely adequate reason to even allow, much less encourage, this kind of thing being inflicted upon me. And I'm more than willing to prove that even more extremely thoroughly if people are seriously going to keep pushing me like they are with this continued extremely brutal disrespect, neglect, and denial of the life I clearly want and deserve, with the kind of connection with Kimmy I've clearly always wanted in life more than literally anything else. Now, of course, I have to be extremely careful when expressing my integrity and authenticity for everything it is in its entirety in this regard, especially now that I've gotten the kind of information I have more recently about how badly I've most likely been getting lied about behind the scenes with the slander and criminal impersonation of me that must have been happening for years. I'm not trying to validate the extreme abuse and massive lies that Kimmy's obviously fully knowingly and intentionally been purporting and facilitating being purported by others about me, especially if she's going around doing things like lying that I have nudes of her that she in reality knows damn well I don't have, and I've never even once tried to pressure her for either. Like I've said, it's always been the case that I'd much rather see her in classy, extremely latex clothing anyways. Maybe she can argue she didn't really believe that's actually the case, though. And you know what? Although I've mentioned my latex fetish to her multiple times before, even in front of many others, let's say she might even be able to reasonably argue that she found it hard to believe both that my latex fetish was that intense and also that I genuinely find her body that arousing. Especially combined with her general insecurities and mental health issues, maybe she genuinely felt it seems extremely unlikely that I'm not particularly upset that I've never seen her naked or even in revealing clothing before. But it's definitely entirely her fault that she never even once seriously tried wearing latex clothing of any kind and seeing if I'd respond especially warmly or excitedly to it or what I'd say. Because I definitely would have taken it as an opportunity to extensively elaborate earlier on and make sure I made the reality extremely clear to her with the absolute least possible drama or chaos I could have caused in the process while being thoroughly convincing. But she didn't leave that as an option for me with the way she behaved. She's even seen how I gave pretty much the least possible attention to her friends or otherwise associates that have tried getting my attention by wearing latex or latex-like containing outfits, and in the process only further reinforced the notion that I was especially interested in seeing specifically Kimmy in latex clothing, and not really interested in seeing anyone else in it. So she really doesn't have anything I'd consider a good excuse. Why the hell has she had her friends wearing latex or latex-like material clothes and trying to get my attention when I've never been even remotely pursuing or interested in any of them, while she deviously underhandedly pretends I'm interested in them, but she herself never wears latex clothing of any kind, despite me constantly talking about touching myself to her for hours daily and literally repeatedly calling her body eternally incomparable perfection countless times to this very day. It puts me in such a difficult spot. I don't want to insist aggressively on her wearing the classy latex clothing I fantasize about seeing her in daily and that I'd touch myself extensively to if I saw her wearing and showing off her perfect body in, but I also sort of feel weird putting zero pressure on her to do it, because I feel like that makes it seem like I'm not nearly as interested in seeing it as I actually am. And at the same time, I also want it to be extremely clear that I absolutely want, demand, and have always been pursuing actual physical intimacy with her in person and a serious intimate life partnership connection like I've been saying, not just seeing her in latex clothing from a distance and touching myself to her latex-clad perfection from a distance and randomly sending her videos of me touching myself to her or something. Again, it's like it's intentionally set up so I'm in a losing kind of position either way. Either I look like an extremely obsessed massive creep, or I look like an extremely fake lying scumbag. Where's the room for me being able to act in a way as to be looking like what I actually am? It's like it was intentionally extremely brutally reduced to as damn near close to nothing as possible. And that most certainly wasn't something I ever wanted or deserved or consented to or owed to anyone to let them do to me. Many narcissists might try to obsessively stalk you and endlessly slander you and possibly also criminally impersonate you in extremely devious ways and force you to validate their abuse and brainwash you into allowing and possibly even facilitating them in making you look like you were completely the problem in the connection, trying to meticulously set you up in situations where you're left at an absolutely unconditional loss by continuing to engage with them in any way whatsoever. That's why anyone reasonably intelligent will normally tell you that distancing yourself from a narcissist as much as possible and ultimately trying to cut them out of your life completely is the only good answer to dealing with people like that. And perhaps that's truly the correct response in many cases, which even I myself have had to exercise with some of the bigger pieces of garbage from my past, like both of my extremely psychotic narcissistic parents. But it's not really a correct or even actually viable way to deal with a narcissist if it's someone you're genuinely so extremely incomparably aroused by the body of that you actually touch yourself to them for hours daily, even just to their fully clothed body wearing regular clothing, even despite the fact that that's not, has never been, and will never be a fetish of yours. And even less so the correct way to deal with them when that same exact person is also someone with serious influence in the world who literally makes a career out of being what's literally called an influencer. Especially if you're someone who's been developing a skill set since childhood that you intended to utilize to dominate in a career in an adjacent field to theirs. Letting such a person do extreme narcissistic abuse to you and get away with it means letting them just straight up trash your life completely and throw away all your positive life prospects. You become a complete loser that has your life extremely brutally controlled by them, leaving you with serious depression and anxiety. Either you go slave away at a regular job and live some extremely pathetic life where you gave up completely on your dreams and potential, or you end up in a perpetual power struggle where you're likely going to end up a drug addict in order to cope, or you just become an even bigger degenerate and become a career criminal going in and out of jail, or your depression and anxiety becomes so severe you end up taking your own life or rotting away in a mental hospital. I'm not being dramatic. I'm not exaggerating. This is the reality I've had to face and live with, having to constantly process my emotions about and deal with all the sadness and anger that I've had to endure with the constant backstabbing and slandering and abusive attitudes from Kimmy and her associates and everyone else that so extremely carelessly, brutally ignored the truth of the situation I'm facing, and how extremely, exceedingly intolerable and unbearable and undesirable any life is for me, where I'm not getting the kind of connection with Kimmy that I've always wanted, and also not getting the extremely brutal retribution I want and deserve to exact upon her and anyone else that caused me to be denied of it, if I'm actually absolutely unconditionally incapable of getting it. And for anyone being exceedingly, disingenuously, meticulously, abusively manipulative regarding what absolutely unconditionally incapable means, it means within any even remotely reasonable circumstances where there's any reasonable standard for achieving it solidly established and consistently maintained, which, since it remains non-existent even to this day, no matter how extremely clearly I'm going to extremely great lengths to draw boundaries where it's apparent it needs to be, there clearly are extremely malicious bad faith actors attempting to lie extremely badly about the reality of my life in attempts to prevent me from ever being able to achieve that extremely necessary boundary that destroys my life if it remains non-existent. Yet I'm painted as dramatic, or abusive, or toxic, or whatever other negative garbage just for standing up for myself and stating the reality that I'm being treated how I am, and not doing so literally, extremely, brutally, absolutely intolerably ruins my life. It's so extremely clear to the people doing this to me that that's the case too, to the point where I remained silent just once after Kimmy tried forcing me out of her life, and then back into another toxic narcissistic abuse cycle she'd been thrashing me around in the exact same kind of way with for years. Just once. And literally within only a week, she's acting like I literally died in real life, and she went on her Discord server and flaunted causing my death. She pretended I validated her pretending happened by saying she's finally at peace with her past. And I'm the problem here? If you're not going to believe someone else is doing this to me for their own selfish gain, then what? I'm doing this to myself? Why the hell would I do this to myself? Pour all my time and energy into being extremely cruel and abusively fake to someone with insane, ridiculous lies day in and day out, day after day, so unbelievably obsessed with stirring drama in people's lives that I'm addicted to it even when it comes so extremely severely to my own detriment that I'm literally not benefiting in any way whatsoever from it, and I'm in fact detrimented so extremely severely by it that I'm left literally homeless and eating out of trash cans just to survive because I've been so extremely brutally abused and abandoned by every person that was ever at all close to me or should have supported me in some way? Does that even make sense? What kind of ridiculous situation is that? Such a thing is so unbelievably unrewarding and unfulfilling in literally every single possible way that it's impossible anyone would function like that. If I was the type of person to do that, I'd already be locked up in a mental hospital or in jail or literally dead in real life one way or another. But instead, I'm making the kinds of podcast releases I am, and yet even the government continues to neglect me and refuses to take any truly adequate action against the literal criminals doing this to me. So now, at least as far as I'm concerned, it's not even a matter of proving that people have been lying anymore. It's about proving just how extremely, exceedingly, unacceptably badly, in every single way, both in how I handle content I put out in this podcast and also how I live my life as a whole. And I know it extremely damn well, believe me. Which brings me to wrapping this release up by addressing what I saw at the beginning of Kimmy's livestream following my last release.
Hi. The baby is sleeping behind us, so we have to be quiet. The baby is sleeping. Oh, I woke her up. I'm sorry, baby. Sometimes when your cat is sleeping, don't you just want to wake her up? They look too cute. They're too cute. I just want to disturb their peace. They're too cute. Oh, so cute. Cats sleep too much. I need more attention. Dude, actually owning one cat makes me realize why people own more than one cat. Because as a human being, one cat does not give humans enough attention. Humans need the attention of, like, at minimum 2 or 3 cats. Like, cats need to take, like, shifts.
Okay, so, first of all, once again, I do not, have never, and will never be seeking or consenting to being degraded as being seen as anyone's pet in some way, entirely regardless of anyone's supposed intent or perspective behind it. I personally would feel it's unacceptably degrading and I would never tolerate it. But more importantly, there are some seriously concerning implications of issues I feel compelled to address because of Kimmy's comments here, which my perspective on remains the exact same, entirely regardless of any notion of a connection to anyone being perceived as or in relation to anyone's pet of some kind. I do not, have never, and will never particularly care for anyone, including but not limited to Kimmy, calling me, seeing me as, or desiring me to act or be cute. I don't have never had, and will never have any particular fixation with acting, feeling, or being perceived as cute by anyone for any reason, nor with associating with anyone that might at all be that way somehow. Someone calling you cute is normally a good thing, I guess. But given the context of the situation, and how it seems to me that Kimmy considering me cute or trying to act like I care about receiving validation from her or others for being seen as cute is actually something rather extremely severely harming my life, I'm actually considerably upset at it seemingly being the case. I certainly don't care for her calling me or seeing me as cute if it's some weird, patronizing, or manipulative garbage that attempts to force friendship on me or somehow operates to facilitate anyone's attempts to warp the narrative of my life and enable people to try to abusively impose control on me. Now, if things were very different and Kimmy had good communication with me, and we had a close, intimate connection with frequent physical sexual intimacy, and she called me cute in a way where I felt it was coming from a place of genuine warmth, without ulterior motives or underhanded implications of inferiority or deception, perhaps I could appreciate the compliment. But even then, I don't, never did, and never will want to be seen as just cute by her. I want her to see me as sexy and someone she craves frequent, tender, in-person sexual intimacy with, like I feel towards her. Also, I don't, never have, and never will find it necessary or even preferable to have multiple sexual or romantic partners. I've always been pursuing an exclusive relationship with Kimmy, not an open relationship, not some weird thing where we're sort of entertaining romantic prospects with others on the side out of boredom or anything else. I'm absolutely thoroughly certain I would never feel bored of Kimmy and want to pursue someone else or have someone else at the same time in any capacity. I'm also absolutely unconditionally unwilling to share Kimmy, even if she really wants to share me with others or be shared with others herself. If Kimmy will be with me, she's mine and only mine, like I'm hers and only hers. I don't just prefer it that way, I require it that way. Since it suddenly also popped up into relevancy after quite some time of complete silence regarding it, I also feel it's pertinent at this point to explicitly reiterate that Kimmy's ASMR content does not, never did, and never will appease me or force me to shut up or reconsider my position in any capacity in regard to this conflict. I'm not indebted to Kimmy for her ASMR in any way, shape, or form. And I've always wanted much more from Kimmy than just hearing her whisper or make any kind of ASMR. Since I really want to make sure I've made it abundantly clear as well how extremely it especially concerns me the possibility that people have went to extremely great lengths to perpetuate any notion that I want, need, deserve, or benefit in any way ever from Kimmy ever getting pregnant, I want to take this opportunity to reiterate that Kimmy absolutely unconditionally must get an abortion immediately if she's pregnant right now. I seriously see it as a pregnancy that never should have happened if she's pregnant. I seriously do not, never did, and never will validate her getting pregnant by anyone at all for any reason. And again, if there are any legal agreements anyone's claiming I'm supposedly bound by that suggest anything in contradiction with this or anything else I've said here, they are completely illegal contracts I've never even seen before in my entire life and absolutely unconditionally never would have agreed to. Finally, I want to make it extremely clear that my willingness to communicate things like a mature adult here doesn't at all mean I'll compromise to some ridiculous, stupid extent to allow anything that at all compromises my integrity or imposes some kind of life on me that I don't want or deserve. There seriously needs to be serious, immediate change in the state of this conflict, and not at all in the direction of disrespecting or neglecting the reality of my life and feelings and what I'm over and over explicitly exactly saying in this podcast that is completely intended to be taken as it is on the surface with absolutely no hidden messages or ulterior motives whatsoever.